I think we saw in recent days a legislature in Tennessee failed to respond to the issue of gun violence, even in the wake of, once again, precious young lives taken. And rather, they came down with kind of draconian response to legislators who were trying to push their colleagues to do the right thing. That letter is as relevant now as it was when he wrote it in the 1960s.
Hey, TheGrio fam, it's Gerren Keith Gaynor, White House correspondent and managing editor of politics at TheGrio, and I'm here with Georgia U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock. Senator Warnock, welcome to TheGrio. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So you are participating in a tradition on Capitol Hill, an annual commemorative reading of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s A Letter from Birmingham Jail. First, tell me why this tradition is so important and why is it relevant today in America in particular?
Well, let me just say that I first encountered the letter from the Birmingham Jail as a student and at Morehouse College, and it's something that I go back to time and time again. I think it's appropriate that here in the Congress, we read this letter on the floor of the Senate every year. It's a tradition started by Doug Jones, who was a senator from Alabama. And we've continued it for 5 years. I'm glad to participate in it. It's a letter that really speaks, well, it raises a lot of issues, but it speaks to the urgency of the times and the need to be present, to be engaged, and to do the things that are necessary to move our country closer toward its ideals.
And you and Dr. King have quite a few things in common. Both went to Morehouse College, as did I. You are also the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King also served as pastor, and a member of the clergy, obviously. Does the letter from Birmingham Jail have a special meaning for you? I know you said you first read it as a college student. Does it have a special meaning for you to be able to read his words on the Senate floor as an elected senator from the state of Georgia?
Oh, it's powerful. Look, I never imagined that I'd be standing on the floor as a senator reading Dr. King's letter. But look, the kid who grew up in public housing in Savannah, Georgia, didn't dream that I'd be the pastor of Dr. King's church. I often say that God always dreams a dream bigger than the dream we're dreaming for ourselves. But I think that it's important always to provide context for that letter. I mean, Dr. King isn't just writing something that's generic that he's speaking to a larger public, although it's come to mean that. He's speaking to clergy persons who are on the other side, who are criticizing his campaign of direct action in Birmingham, where this was a city where gripped by the tentacles of segregation. Another word for Birmingham in those days, they called it Bombingham, because they were literally bombings of churches. The violence and the brutality of oppression was very much alive in that city, signified as later by the killing of 4 precious little girls in a church. And in the wake of that, you had clergy writing to Dr. King, criticizing his campaign of direct action as if he was the problem rather than segregation. And these are all people of faith. But what you see in that letter clearly is 2 countervailing views of what it means to be a person of faith. And Dr. King said, you're criticizing my action and you're deeply concerned about the atmosphere that he was creating for change. And I'm not seeing a similar concern about the conditions that make my actions necessary. I think that is a message that is relevant for all times, but especially this moment. I think we saw in recent days a legislature in Tennessee failed to respond to the issue of gun violence, even in the wake of, once again, precious young lives taken. And rather, they came down with kind of draconian response to legislators who were trying to push their colleagues to do the right thing. That letter is as relevant now as it was when he wrote it in the 1960s.
You mentioned the Tennessee Three and what happened in Tennessee with Representative Justin J. Pearson and Justin Jones. And we are at an interesting time in America where we're seeing what many feel are undemocratic actions taken by some elected officials and even people who are not elected officials, like January 6th. How does America preserve its democracy at a time when many feel that America's democracy is slowly being chipped away?
We have to stand up. And I think there is a temptation in moments like this to say it's just too hard, to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the anti-democratic forces that are at work and afoot in our country right now. But here again, I think Dr. King and the lessons of that era are important, because I think we look back on that time as if the victories of the civil rights movement were inevitable. The truth is they were quite improbable. He had no reason to think that he could win. John Lewis had no reason to think that he could walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and somehow that physical bridge could become a bridge to the future. I think he was just trying to stay alive that day so he could fight the next day. But by some stroke of grace, coupled with human resilience and determination, a deep commitment to the covenant of democracy, he was able to push the country closer towards his ideals. In a moment like this, we need people who are willing to stand up and to bear witness to the American covenant, e pluribus unum, out of many one. Our nation is divided, to be sure, but I'm not about to give up on that covenant. I'm not about to give up on America. And I'm certainly not about to give in to the forces of the anti-democratic forces that are trying to steal the people's voices in a moment like this, which is why we have to vote. We have to continue to stand up for voting rights. I'm going to continue to try to fight to get voting rights legislation passed in this Congress. And we have to stand up against the kind of politics of fear and fear-mongering that has convinced us that we ought to be afraid of each other. I say be afraid of politicians who tell us to be afraid of each other, whether we're talking about people of color or people in the LGBTQ plus community, or immigrants who have made this country great. I think that there are craven politicians, not much unlike the Bull Connors of Birmingham, who are trying to convince American citizens to be afraid of other American citizens because they don't look like you, they don't worship like you, they love differently, so you should be afraid. I say be afraid of politicians who are telling us to be afraid of one another. And very often, the movement for that comes not necessarily from the inside, but from the outside, which is why I'm focused not only on the work I do here in the Senate, but on the kinds of grassroots movement that strengthen what we can get done here.
And Dr. King's letter from Birmingham Jail, as you mentioned, was addressed to members of clergy. And you are also a member of clergy, and I wanted to ask you about how many of the controversial laws we've seen, whether they were anti-LGBTQ plus laws, or when we talk about abortion bans, for example, it is rooted in a conservative faith movement. What do you say to those who use faith to justify these type of laws that many feel are oppressive in nature?
Sadly, Jesus is a victim of identity theft these days in America. And as someone who has read the gospel my whole life, I am struck by the lies that are told in his name, and by the hatred and the bigotry that's stirred up in the name of faith. I am a Matthew 25 Christian. I believe the words of the gospel when it says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you gave me some clothes. I was in prison. I was in a hospital. I was sick and you visited me. I was a stranger. That's what the gospel says. And you welcomed me. And some ask, Lord, when were you hungry? When were you a stranger, an immigrant? When were you sick? When were you in prison? He said, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it also unto me. So for me, the acid test of the depth of one's commitment to faith, not only to the Christian gospel, but I think the themes that are resonant in all of the great faith traditions is measured by your commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family. And it is that ethic that informs my work every day in the Senate. I think we need voices of faith and people of conscience who do not necessarily claim any faith tradition at all, but believe in justice, compassion, empathy, mercy, building what Dr. King called the beloved community. We need that now more than ever.
Senator Raphael Warnock, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.